Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I'm Mark Skorka, President of Opera America, and welcome to another edition of our Conversations. This evening, it's a conversation with the fantastic American baritone, Thomas Hampson. We are delighted to have you here in the hall in this incredibly inclement weather, and given the traffic reports, I think we'll be welcoming people through the entire conversation. Those who are watching our program on live stream from Palm Beach or Palm Springs, you should just know that it's cold, but we're strong here in New York. We're also strong in our defense of the National Endowment for the Arts, and even though the president, the first time a president has zeroed out the NEA since it was established in the 1960s by Lyndon Johnson, we will be working hard with all of our advocates in Washington and our spokespeople across the country to make sure that there continues to be a National Endowment for the Arts, for the Humanities, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and other agencies that are part of the spiritual underpinning of this country. So we'll work hard with you and on your behalf. I wanted to, thank you. I wanted to let you know about some upcoming dates. We are closing in on the end of our 2016-17 season, but we still have several events coming up. The Emerging Artists Recital on March 28, featuring winners of the Opera Index competition. Our Creators in Concert program will be with William Balcom on April 6th, and we'll hear performances of excerpts of his works. And then our final conversation of the year is with Renee Fleming, and that is on April 25th. So if you are available on any of those dates, we'd be happy to see you here at the National Opera Center. Thomas Hampson is the winner of a Grammy Award, 5 Edison Awards, and the Grand Prix du Disque. He is an incredibly versatile and superb interpreter of lieder, opera, American song, and other music. In looking through some of the reviews of his work, one writer wrote, "He commands a probing mind, a keen imagination, a lyric baritone of remarkable suavity, and yes, a useful aura of matinee idol magnetism." He is back at the Metropolitan Opera right now singing one of his signature roles, Germain in La Traviata. Please join me in welcoming Thomas Hampson. Thomas, welcome. So happy to have you here. Please have a seat.
Good evening.
And welcome back to the National Opera Center.
Yeah,
you were here on our opening day.
That's right. And I haven't been here since.
Well,
I apologize. I've sent money. I've had other people come do things. I've supported actions you've done here, but I haven't come down.
Well, we now are welcoming over 75,000 people a year here.
Fantastic.
For auditions,
Fantastic.
Recitals, lessons, everything. It's
Wonderful.
It's been great. And thank you for being here on opening night. I always start these conversations with a standard question. Who brought you to your first opera?
Well, my very first opera, I'm a latecomer, actually. The first opera I ever saw, I was in it. I was in the chorus for Così fan tutte, and then for Barbara Seville when the Seattle Opera Company was visiting Spokane, Washington.
Oh my.
Yeah, and I was already, 16 or 17 years old. The first opera I saw was in Spokane, was also, I believe it was Seattle visiting with Rigoletto. And that was very exciting. I'm not a child who, grandma or my aunt or something did like that. I sort of came in the side and back doors to all of this.
Well, you're not the first great singer I've spoken to who attended the first opera on stage. I think Pat Rosette also, her first opera, she was on stage in the ensemble in some way. That there are a number of you great singers who came to opera that way. When did you realize that you had a vocal gift? That was a choral teacher saying, "You've got it, kid"?
Well, again, I think I was rather late to all this. I was in Spokane. I was very musical as a child, and our family was very musical. My mother played the church organ and piano, and she also, when I was very young, she just moved to the community where we were with my father, was involved in light opera and that sort of thing. I never saw her on stage. I was too young for that. But music, my older sisters, I have two older sisters, they studied music. My next older sister is a musician, composer, and is still very active musically, and is a director of a church group outside of Seattle. I learned piano and you know, trumpet and drums, and I actually settled on tuba for about 3.5 years in junior high school, and enjoyed that enormously. I was quite good at it. But I always sang, and I was a good boy soprano and a good boy alto. And then I played a lot of baseball, right. and then I went on. And so music was always part of something. But I was going to go on to school and study law or something, and this rather remarkable voice teacher in Spokane, Washington, came up to me in the spring after we had yearly competitions and festivals and so forth. You know, what are my plans? I'm going to go to school, yada, yada, yada. He said, well, I think that's marvelous, young man. But, you know, I perceive in you over the last couple of years a very significant artistic side to your soul. And we wouldn't want you to neglect that, would we? No, we wouldn't, would we? No. If you'd like to talk about that some more, give me a call. You know, but it's a little hard to explain how exotic that conversation was, because I was raised in a Seventh-day Adventist environment. I had gone to private school until through high school, and the Seventh-day Adventists and the Catholics are not what you would call close in philosophy. So this was quite remarkable. She was a student of Lottie Lehmann in Santa Barbara, and Bill Vennard down at USC. And those are all the stomping grounds of Marilyn Horne. Right. And so I started studying voice with her, and she's the one that said, I know you've learned a little German in high school. Do you realize that, you know, people have said German poetry to music? Nah, get out of here, really? So she hands me these Schubert and Schumann books and records and says, have a listen, maybe something will catch your eye or interest. Well, you know, the rest is history, as it were. And I finished my political science studies in the public school, and I went to then her Catholic liberal arts college and took credits back and forth and all that sort of thing. And with her, I studied comparative vocal pedagogies and score reading conducting. And at the other school, I was studying government and political science and comparative literatures. And, you know, just kind of threw them all in one big stew, and ended up in California at the Santa Barbara Music Academy of the West with Marcel Sanger. And between the two of them in that time, when I was probably 21 or 22, they were very demonstrative to me that I was talented. It's always tough, I think, to ask a singer, you know, when did they realize, boom, you know. Let's see, I was 47.
Last week.
When Leonard Bernstein said, good, you know, really? You know, but it was that kind of encouragement. I mean, the subtitle of my autobiography will certainly be "My Voice Discovered Me." I have no ambition to write that, and I'm not in the middle of it. But I'm just saying, you know, it would be that. You know, it's been like this flower, this awakening kind of thing.
These conversations, which are interesting to all of us, are frequently viewed by young rising singers. We see these conversations in their archive life as a tool for young singers.
Right.
So it's fascinating that your career then went really quickly. And
It did.
Because there you are in college in your early 20s.
When?
No, the launch of your career was fast. Because it was San Francisco Opera competition, Merrill Opera program, the Metropolitan Opera National Council auditions. That happened in a relatively short time frame.
It did.
And exceptional teaching, a natural voice. How did it go so fast?
Well, it did, and that's just the competition part of it. And I am very much conscious that I'm speaking to my younger colleagues who are putting it together. The good news is, you know, if you're listening, that's already shows a certain initiative on your part, which is very healthy and very smart. The bad news is that the business I started in is not the business you're starting in. So it's a whole different set of contexts that they're entering in that are different than mine. What I think is important, and any career, in any time, any generation, you know, the old joke with Robert Merrill, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. Well, yes, and very early on, there was a saying, you know, the saying, fortune favors the prepared mind. That's not just about winning the lottery ticket. The point of that is be ready for your next step, and the next step, if you're talented and dedicated, will probably come. The steps will come if you're ready for the steps to be there. But if you're just banging around on it and hoping that somebody's going to go, okay, I think you're wonderful, you know, go home, do something else. It's not going to work like that.
There weren't in the late 70s.
And yes, I was very gifted and very fortunate. There's no question about that.
There wasn't the network of competitions that we have today.
I was in Los Angeles. I didn't come from Los Angeles. I came from Washington State. I was raised in Washington State. I was born in the state of Indiana, but 3 months later, my father went out as a chemical nuclear engineer to Hanford and worked with GE and the nuclear industry all my life in the desert outside of Richland, Washington. And then I moved as a young boy at 14, I guess I was, to an academy, a boarding academy, and went to school near Spokane, and that's where I became part of Spokane. I went to my first concert in Spokane. I had season tickets, you know, I did the festival. I stayed in Spokane. I went to public school there. I became and realized who I am, and was under tremendous tutelage of this wonderful woman, Sister Marietta Coyle, and Don Tulin, who also passed away last year, who was the music director and who was the executive director of the American Symphony League in his last years. So I mean, I hit a very fortuitous time in Spokane. Spokane's having hard times. They don't have the infrastructure they had then. And then I went to California, and I was sent down there because Marietta thought I should go there, and another pianist in town who had been down there knew these people. I mean, you know, you go. And so I did this class and met Gwendolyn Kodalski, who was Marilyn Horne's closest teacher and coach, who was the guru for song, and that was always my passion. And you know, as they say, it went very quickly, but it went rock on rock. You know, the foundation was built, I think, in a good way, but once we started putting the walls up, and you know that it did go very, very quickly.
We'll talk a bit about the song literature a little bit later on, because I do want to talk to you about that. And you did do Merrill Opera in San Francisco, but not the string of young artist programs that some singers do today. But the time in Dusseldorf must have been very important.
Well, I think that, Mark, I think it's important, and I think, I mean, in the interest of candidness, and because that's why I'm here, and I'm 60 years old. I'm happy to be here. I love my younger colleagues. I love teaching. I think it's important to tell this part of the story, and I tell it out of no critique or no anything else. But I went to Dusseldorf because I could not get into a program.
Really?
Nobody invited me to anything. I was in California for 2 years. I knew nobody in California, but I just started singing. And there was this marvelous woman, Mila Wermer, who kind of ran everything vocal in Los Angeles at that time, and she was head of the Western region auditions. And she took a liking to me, fair enough, and so I got some, sing for this party, and can you do that? And got brought in the back door and a bowl of spaghetti, and went out and with the dancing dog and went home. But that's what you do, I raised money for the Los Angeles Opera Company before it was the Los Angeles Opera Company in fundraisers, and they would pay me $50-$60 to come sing 3 or 4 songs, and I was happy as could be. I was singing funerals at Forest Lawn cemeteries for $25 a pop. I mean, you do what you do to stay alive. I waited tables. I did whatever you need to do. I personally love doing landscape gardening in Spokane during the early years. I worked in construction, which was very lucrative. You do what you do to stay alive, and you make sure that you're healthy, and you study, and you learn, and you take the time that you have to do what you do. Those of you who have to work very hard just to stay alive and study on the side, in a lot of ways are more focused and more able than perhaps somebody who's just been handed a scholarship or something else. And I don't mean that indictingly. I just mean that organization of your time. when you are practicing, it is about that. You know, I play golf. You know, you're going to go out and hit a bucket of balls. You're not going to go out and hit 30 balls. You're going to go out and hit 30 shots as if they were 30 shots on the golf course. Then you're practicing. This is how you focus on your life. But, you know, I went through the competition. I won some money. The break I had was in the one competition. I was expected to win, and the prize was to go to Germany and be paid to go to Germany for an audition tour. That night, this wonderful soprano showed up who we knew in the area, who had a marvelous instrument, but it was a little bit, you know, a pig on skates. And that night, she just pulled it all together and sang a Dich treue Halle, and everybody, wah! So she won, and she was off, you know, and then she went off and she got her job in Augsburg, and, you know, and you know, there was that. But the judge was a very famous, this was the Zachary auditions. And I'm deeply grateful to Lauren and Nedra Zachary for their support back in those days. You know, we're talking ancient history here, kids. But the judge was Wolfgang Stoll, big important German agent. He said, I understand you want to come to Germany. And I said, well, I think I'd like to go do an audition job, and maybe, do you think, you know? He said, look, if you can afford it, you can come over. I'll represent you. I'll put it together for you. But you have to get there. I have no money for you, and I have no guarantees. But I think a young lad like you, you're obviously bright. You've got a very strong lyric voice, lyric baritone voice. You know, have you sung Guglielmo? Yes. You know, well, that's what you're going to sing a lot of. So come on over. Let's see what we can find. I went over to the competition. By that time, of course, my teacher at USC was Horst Günther, who was a German. So he knew the German system in and out because he'd sung for 40 years as a baritone, with colleagues with Fritz Wunderlich and of that generation, you know. So it seemed natural. At that time, I was 24 or 5 years old, and I was saying to myself, opera singer? Really? What does that mean? Can you have kids? You know, you know, what's your life like? So I went to Germany, and I went through Maryland. They did not invite me to stay. I asked whether positions were available in a couple of programs. I didn't particularly want to go to school. I'd had these 2 degrees. I didn't want to go to Indiana or I didn't even think about Juilliard or Manhattan. You know, are you kidding? I didn't think about matriculating. I thought, I need to know whether this is what I want to do, and whether I didn't know anything about it, so it made sense. And when we got the idea to go to Germany to get a job, there was nothing standing in my way, which is a nice way to put it. And so that was what I was going to do, you know, and that's what I did. And the first place I sang was Dusseldorf, and they offered me the job, which I was extremely suspicious, and so was Stoll. And he went and negotiated it that afternoon. He came back out, and he sat me down, and he said, look, you have no perspective to this. I don't know how to tell you this, but you're being offered one of the best jobs for a young singer that I can negotiate or anybody can negotiate. It's a fixed amount of evenings. It is a specific repertoire. He cannot ask you to sing something if he thinks he hears it. Maybe you'd be an exciting 27-year-old Scarpia. That's not going to happen, you know, which is what was always people's big fear. So I started to work. At that moment, when I was pulling down, you know, I don't know, $27,000, $28,000 a year, but it was a monthly salary with health benefits and you know, a regular regime in an opera house. And you go, wow, Dad, it looks like I can make my living. You know, I mean, these are great moments, but I think they're important. You can, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues that have had spectacular careers would have similar times to say, I didn't know what to do, and then somebody called. I was on my way to Germany, and Richard Gaddis called, and 2 days before I got on the plane and said, you know, and he'd been the judge at the Metropolitan Opera Division. I'm putting together a Così fan tutte cast in St. Louis, and I've got Calvin Simmons and Jonathan Miller, and I think you'd be a marvelous Guglielmo. Do you have time? Well, Mr. Gaddis, thank you very much, but I'm actually moving to Germany. Well, when you get there, would you ask them to send you back? Well, that's it. Yes. I can try. I was certain. Yeah, I'll be. That's a good idea. You know.
It's so funny because my next point on my list here was the Così fan tutte in St. Louis.
Huge.
It was huge, and there are few singers where you can point to a kind of pivotal role, a pivotal production, where the spotlight was on you. And that
Jerry Hadley, Ashley Putnam, Trish McCaffrey, Ruth Golden, John Steen, Calvin Simmons, Jonathan Miller, little Tommy Hampson. you know, it was a summer. It was just whoosh.
I was very friendly with Jerry at the time,
God rest
and he was so excited. He came running into the lower concourse of the New York State Theater, where I worked at New York City Opera. He said, "You're not going to believe this Così fan tutte," and he told me all about it from his point of view and how excited
We'd never
he was
met
about it.
until the first rehearsal.
Yeah.
At all, and it was, you know, very exciting. And Ashley had won the national auditions, and I mean, one of the most beautiful young singers you'd ever seen in your life, and sang beautifully. It was a very, very exciting time, very exciting time. And I will never forget the conversation. This again, you think, well, the career was launched. Well, no, you know, I was coming home from Dusseldorf, you know, and I was singing in Dusseldorf. The sergeant in the third act of Mano Lescaut, and you know, he's the guy that calls out the names of the whores as they get put on the wagon to, you know, slip.
Very important.
It's a pivotal role, and most people just fast forward to that scene when they watch it. And in Yamadori, in a 35-year-old production in Dusseldorf, and it was a fun and humiliating evening. The first rehearsal I was written up for Yamadori, I had actually already sung Sharpless in Spokane, Washington. And so I got written up for Butterfly for rehearsal in Dusseldorf, and I thought, well, finally they caught on, you know, and none of this silly repertoire, I'm going to go. And so I showed up, and the guy, you know, comes in, slaps a score, starts playing, and, you know, and he points at me, and I looked at him like, you know, well, get to my bit and I'll sing, you know. And he said, why aren't you singing? And I said, what am I supposed to? Sharpson, what are you playing? Where are you, you know? Sharpless, you're singing Yamadori. Okay, fine, so we looked at Yamadori. Well, then fast forward, so it was a 35-year-old production, and in Germany, productions go like that. This is the costume, this is the makeup, this is what we do. Well, the costume had been worn by several people, but certainly nobody 6'4". And so, you know, I had these sandals, and then I had these bobby socks, and I had Yamadori's coat sort of started here, and then we had this sort of wild terrain of haired skin that in keeping with the rest of my makeup, they decided to paint yellow. And all the rest of it, the whole thing. So I come out, and they're carrying me on the sedan, and all the way, I'm on the sedan chair, all the way down to my entrance, you hear these guys going, God, he's heavy. So we get all the way down there, you know, the doors open, and I of course, being the Stanislavski man that I am, you know, I'm a perfect Yamadori, you know, walk in like this, and I can hear in the audience people snickering.
That's very
because it was like, look ridiculous, you know, until I could finally drop to my knees on the pillow and stay there to be this Japanese. That's what you do. And it was wonderful. I loved it.
Learn your stagecraft.
And exactly, every night. And I, you know, but I was listening to Gwyneth Jones sing Butterfly. And the wonderful Bulgarian tenor, Naj, who was there at the house, you know, the house tenor, unbelievable. Eugene Holmes, you know, unbelievable American singer. You know, at that time, Dusseldorf was the largest ensemble opera house in the world. I was one of 4 lyric baritones. There were 9 baritones, just baritones on staff. You know, plethora of mezzos, 16 sopranos, you know, and you got into the repertoire if you were lucky, you know, and even the smaller roles. And you know, I was the Zweite Gralsritter in Parsifal. And I went into the casting director and I said, are there any other small roles like this in other Wagner operas that I could learn, because this is fascinating to me. This woman stood up in this dark audience. She was a huge woman, and she looked at me and she said, young man, that is the first time in my 33 years in German theater that someone has come in and asked for small roles. And I said, yeah, but I don't know this stuff.
Yeah.
Now, you know who the first Gralsritter was in that production in Düsseldorf? Yeah. Peter Seifert.
Oh my goodness.
You know who Gurdemanz was? Karl Ritterbusch. Do you know who Kundry was? Mignon Dunn.
Really?
I mean, this was Düsseldorf. My ears were like
How
cauliflower,
fabulous.
you know?
Fabulous.
And I went there, you know, whenever, if I wasn't too tired, or I went down there often just to stand on the side or go to the show, listen to somebody.
Elizabeth Schwartz.
This is something I must say I do criticize my younger colleagues, is that they're not passionate enough about simply accepting the possibility of hearing whoever it is at that time where they are and listen. You know, don't be so damn judgmental. Absorb and build your world of reference for sound. It has nothing to do with imitation. It has to do with who am I, where am I, what is that like? Well, gee, that wasn't very good, or gee, that was spectacular, or, you know, chapeau, they got through that, or whatever that is. That's an extremely important part of our education.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. To see, to listen, and to watch.
Absolutely.
And you met Elizabeth Schwarzkopf in San Francisco.
I did.
But then studied with her some in Vienna.
I did. She was and she lived in Zurich. Ah. That was in the summer that I was in San Francisco. That after the Marilla, and I was moving on to find something to do and went to Europe. By the time I sang for her there, I knew I was going to Europe, and I told her that, and she was very taken and very. I mean, when you asked me the first question, you know, there are moments that all of us have where somebody says, "You got it, kid. Stay on it." Mm-hmm. This, you know, or I hear in you a future, if you're smart, if you're, you know, and I find myself saying that sometimes to young singers in a class and say, look, you know, you're gifted, prove to me you're talented. I make a big distinction in that, whatever that meant. And she was like that, and so she said, look, I know you're coming to Europe, check in, keep track, you know, let me know, which I did. And I did call her. I said, this looks like a good thing to do in Düsseldorf. Horst was all for it. Stoll was all for it. Schwarzkopf was all for it. I'm gone. I'm good to go. I came back to America for a year in 80, 81. And it was that spring that I won the Met auditions. And I already had the contract in Düsseldorf. And everybody, there was a sense of relief, actually, for most people. Because they said, what are you going to do? And the Met did not offer me the Young Artist program, but they were, good, go to Germany. I think that's a good thing for you to do, meaning, you know, go study some more, go think some more, whatever. So I did do that. When I came back and then sang for Cosi van Tutte and Joan Ingpen, the fantastic woman that she was running the Met at the time, artistic advisor, was there for one of the performances, and we were also dutifully marched by her desk for her bequeathment of praise or damnation. And I remember she looked at me after the performance, and we were all feeling quite self-satisfied. I don't think we were braggadocious, but we knew we had a good show. We were on. It was great, and we were hoping to, you know, have at least sort of an arm thrown around us of, you know, welcome to the business kind of thing. That wasn't Joan's style. So I sat there, and she looked at me and says, "I understand you're working in Germany." And I said, yes, I have a job in Düsseldorf. For how long? I said, well, I've finished my first year. I have another year, and there's an option on that contract. And she said, Well, I must say, if you didn't have that contract, I would have said, bingo, right straight into our Young Artist program. And that hit me kind of sideways. So I looked at her and I said, well, I'm not going to break a contract. Why don't I just come sing for you when I've sung a little longer in Düsseldorf, and we'll see how that goes. And she said, never met her again, never saw her again.
Wow.
By the time I came and did sing, those days were over.
So the song literature, you have achieved such acclaim singing leader, and not many opera singers have acclaim in both worlds as much as you do. What draws you to leader, and how does it counterbalance your work in opera? How do the two speak to you as art
For those
forms?
of you live on live stream, this is now called part 1, and now we're into part 2. Is this a 4-hour segment here? Don't get me started on song. Look, it's not just, song is to me not another genre. It's not, of course it's another genre, but it's not this other thing we do. You know, obviously being brought into the whole notion of singing in classical music from someone who studied with Lotte Lehmann, that tradition, and by the way, she'd also studied with Charles Pansera and Pierre Bernac in France. So actually my first lessons were as much Fauré as they were Schubert and Schumann. But since I had studied German and I took more to the language quicker, and just there was a center of gravity there, then I think there was something about the German leader ethos that just made sense to me. So whatever, but song is, in and of itself, is a kind of miracle. And we're talking about what is often called art song. There's a bunch of us that are trying to change art song reference to classic song, and not to be clever, but just to call it what it is, because it is a particular phenomenon of two art forms forming a third art form: poetry and music. And poetry doesn't need music, and music doesn't need poetry. But when they're together, and if you look at what poetry is, you know, poetry are words that stand as symbols of thought. Well, that's language anyway, but certainly in poetry. The power of any poem is its ability to implode in you. It is not a process of disseminating information. You know, I say that hesitantly because obviously, if you look at Whitman, there's recitative kind of moments that are setting it up, and there is some kind of contextual information. But in general, the point of poetry is to experience something as a human being. Well, music is a language. It has its own syntax, has its own nouns and verbs and all those wonderful things. And it also, in a metaphorical sense, is there to articulate some context of being alive. And when that is inspired by a particular poem, it's a conversation between the two. For a long time, I've been a bit of an enemy, if that's too harsh perhaps, to this idea of prima la musica and poi la parole, or prima la parole e poi la musica. To me, that is an answer to a question that does not need to be asked. And I certainly think in song repertoire, and there's enough literature out there, and old-fashioned literature, that still talks like that. You know, well, here, who's dominating who? And, oh, well, you know, music, it's like acid on the top of a frame, and and the words no longer are poems, and Goethe's poetry doesn't have a structure. That's all just a bunch of nonsense. That's not what it's about at all, in my opinion. What happens with music is that music is certainly, when they meld to this third form called song, it is neither the structure of the poem nor the pureness of the music, but they're entering into a dialogue heavily centered in the world of metaphor that is fleshing out as much in your imagination as your heartbeat or your head an experience that human beings have had that rearticulates what it is to be alive, to paraphrase Copeland, right? It's not just entertainment. It is really, they're like signposts of where we are and who we've been. And to do those things well and to dedicate yourself to that process, I do not see as somehow different, extra, or separate from wanting to sing on stage. I see the stage as a perfect development from that. I think young singers should sing songs, not because maybe they'll do song recitals and earn your income on them. I think that song singing is the kernel of what we do as artists. What we do is make audible other very profound thoughts. You know, it's not about what Tom Hampson is communicating. I'm there at the service of Schumann and Heine, or Mahler and Knaben Wunderhorn, or Rückert, or Fauré and Baudelaire, or, you know, who else you want to talk about? Or Walt Whitman and Henry Burleigh. I mean, whatever it is that I'm singing at that moment, or Germont, I'm the doorway through which you are experiencing that moment where we stop the clock and say, okay, what if it were like this? What does that mean to life? And we'll take that home as passionate theater goers we are, and music goers that we are, and digest that and have that moment of reflection of who we are. Being an artist is certainly a responsibility. It's a phenomenal privilege to earn your life like this, but it's not about me.
You know, and you are so well known as an interpreter, as the great interpreter of Mahler, and you have this parallel connection to the American song literature. You mentioned Walt Whitman and others.
Right.
Is the American song literature different in any substantive way from the European song literature?
That's a wonderful question, and I'm so glad you didn't say American Songbook, because that is something else. That is essentially lyrics.
Right.
That is a completely different kind, and it's wonderful. And song as a metaphor of the evidence of existence, as Walt Whitman so beautifully put it, is as myriad as the fingerprints on the planet. And that's fine. What I'm talking about is literally this artistic phenomenon of poetry and music having this metaphorical conversation. Mostly the poetry inspiring music. And actually, the smallest part of that equation, even in the 21st century, is where the poem and the music, the poet and the composer are contemporaneous. So there's always some kind of generational push and shove here that says, forget about the generation, this is about humans. And I think that's very valuable, and that's in every language. And by the way, this phenomenon is in every language, every culture. If you want to know someone's culture, if you want to know who they are, who they've been, why they are, what was going on, what do? We go look at their pictures, we go look at their music, we look at their poetry, we look at what they're writing and their literature. The arts and humanities. It's the blueprint of who we are as human beings. Why on earth would we take that away from our kids in the schools? I don't understand that. It's not a matter of supporting the arts and humanities in schools or the performing arts is not a matter of maybe you're the lucky parent that has the talented child that's going to actually win the talent contest. That's just so vulgar. That's so unnecessary for the actual reason that it's important. Children have as much right to form their Weltanschauung, if you will, their picture of the world and their place in it, in their growing sloughing off of children things into awareness of other things. How else are they going to learn this if we don't hand them a book that says, well, guess what? People have been doing that for a long time.
Feeling those feelings a long time.
Caesar got up one morning and put his sandals on and his toga, and bombed the crap out of Alexander Harbor because he was horny as hell and wanted Cleopatra. I mean, you put whatever vulgar line you want, but it's this continuum. Song, I think belongs to that. You asked me a question that I managed to avoid, and I didn't mean to.
The American song literature.
Yes, the American song. One is defining different. Several years ago, when I decided to do this wonderful Stephen Foster project. And by that time, I had been doing Discography and Wunderhorn and Mahler and a lot of Schumann and that sort of thing. And there was always as an American, absolutely this kind of our songs and those songs. And I did Columbia community concerts, and I was coached by Dorothy Warren Sheldon, and I had my formula of my programs, and you had your German bit, and you had your French bit, and then you got your English bit, and get through the Americans real quick, and most of it went into encores, and that was sort of the formula. Everybody went home happy. And it never made sense, and we endlessly asked the question, who's our Schubert? Who's our Brahms? Who's our Tchaikovsky? Who's our Fauré? And when I was doing this Foster project, I picked up a book by William Austin, kind of a definitive new critical edition study, as it were, on Foster the man, where his songs came from, and cracked it open, started reading, because I didn't know that much about Stephen Foster. And by the way, a lot of us don't know that much about Stephen Foster, because Stephen Foster is a human being who wrote songs and has nothing to do with folk songs, has nothing to do with the mythology of what people think his life was or why he was doing what he was doing. It's quite an extraordinary story, and that was just kind of in vogue in the early 90s to have a look at Stephen Foster. In this book, the first 3 chapters were on translated German poetry, Des Kanam and Wunderhorn, and the influence on folk to modern poetry in all languages, and Thomas More, before practically anything was said about Stephen Foster. And Thomas More, of course, the Irish melodies in Ireland, that's what Stephen Foster wanted to do with his songs. He wanted to create the American Irish melodies, or the American melodies. Now, what does that mean? Well, Thomas More is considered the bard of Ireland. Well, Stephen would have liked to have been the bard of America. Well, what does that mean? That means that there's a human being sitting down and saying, I want to create songs that tell people now and in the future who we are. That's kind of powerful stuff. You look at someone's songs differently than that. If you find a lot of really, I've read through the entire 200 and some songs, curiously, with Foster. Not one of them starts in the minor key. But there's some fun stuff. An awful lot of songs to Willie, who died, left, didn't come back, and was never seen again. A lot of Willies in that book. Contemporaneous with the Civil War. But it became so clear to me that looking for our Foster, or looking for our Schubert, or our Brahms, wasn't the point of American culture. Our culture has grown so deeply, so fast, from so many different regions and areas and influences, that to say American culture, you really have to immediately lock into America as a political entity. You know, that was another thing, living for some time in Germany where people want to talk, oh, the French this and the German this, and then there's the Americans. And I said, well, wait a minute, which Americans? You know, the bayou doesn't have a lot to do with the Gulf of Mexico or with, you know, the coast of California, and Alaska couldn't care less what happens in, well, probably anywhere, but certainly not in North Carolina. You know, I mean, just to have extreme juxtapositions. Then if you look at the history of American culture and you actually see the various growth rates, meaning growth in expression, the arts and humanities, certainly the Northeast dominated, but it came out quite strongly in other regions, and all of them have quite specific vernacular hooks to them. It becomes this kind of amazing roadmap of who we've been as Americans. And I've always found then, from that moment forward, far more interesting to look at American culture through 10 and 15-year slices and let the poets and composers of those times or other times talking to one another, as it were, tell me the story of American culture. And that's been the thrust of the Song of America project for now 15 years. That's the basis of the 2 radio shows I did with WMT, the recordings I've done, and what I'm now gearing up, you know, getting the saddles and roping the wagons together. We're going to do a 50-state tour in 2018-19. Song of America, telling the story of American culture seen through the eyes of our poets and the ears of our composers, I think is one of the most important, important endeavors to really understand the power of our story. And it's not about singling out this or that fantastic composers. We've had plenty of them. I'll tell you the other thing is that the level of creativity in this country is staggering. Why would I not be a partner to the Library of Congress? These vaults and vaults and vaults of music. Is it all fantastic? No. You know, is there something fantastic practically somewhere? Yes. You know, I have a couple of song examples that are just amazing songs. You would sit there and go, wow, I never heard of Neidlinger. So then you go and you get Neidlinger and you get the microfiches and you print them out and you spend your $200 and you create this volume and you sit down with your pianist and you go through it. Let's find the other jewel. There isn't one, you know, but that's the fascination.
But the virtuosity of exploring it.
But the fun part of this project, and also the work and the real mandate that I'm so devoted to, is we're now teaching, meaning Foundation, the people I work with, we teach high school and pre-college and beginning college, right in that sort of, you know, get them before they're gone group and somewhat Generation X. We teach those teachers how to teach social studies, history, economics, through music. Now, in the high schools, the high school teachers, we just had a symposium last November for 400 New York high school teachers who said, you mean I can talk about Langston Hughes with music? I can talk about the Harlem Renaissance in New York. I can talk about New York over the last 100 years, seen through the eyes of composers and the ears of poets, or the other way around, right? And we showed them how to do that. We are showing this. We've been building teaching templates. That's the new frontier. And of course, distance learning is my best friend.
And those are the last 2 points that I wanted to raise with you. Was one, Thomas Hampson as teacher, and what it's like being the Schwarzkopf for Marilyn Horne or Lotte Lehmann to young singers, and how does that feel, and what do you impart to them? And I also wanted to ask you about technology in your teaching, because of course you've done some using I2, but we'll come to the technology second. How does it feel to take on the role of teacher? I know you did a master class yesterday at MSN.
Well, it's not. Yes, I did a master class, and Christian Orto, who runs the distance learning program up at Manhattan. I've been up there for 10 years, and I'm on the board of trustees, and I'm very devoted to Manhattan, and we've been building and trying different pilot projects. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. You know, pushing the envelope. And Christian Orto is respected across the country as one of the leaders of distance learning education. And you know, we pulled some pretty startling numbers yesterday. We had 46,000 viewers on Facebook and MSM, and on, I think we had it on Hampson, I'm not sure, but maybe just those 2. Then it'll be archived and so forth. But you know, it's The energy is not, the energy is to me in this whole world very similar to how I describe the energy in a concert hall or an opera house. If you go out on stage and think you're going to go out and convince somebody of something you can do, you're going to be a nervous wreck, you'll never sing how like you want to, and you'll never actually get the feedback you think you're looking for. You know, I call it the golden retriever complex. You know, you come out on stage and go, do you like me? Want to play? Got something to eat? You know, this is the whole, when I go on stage, or anybody goes on the stage, we, the audience, you have paid the money, you have committed yourself, forget about the money, you have committed yourself to this time to enter into the fantasy of what is being recreated for you, string quartet, piano sonatas, singing, opera, whatever it is, the energy has to be from the audience to the, I hate the word performers, but but it is. We're the doorway. It's not about this "oh come and adore me" bullshit that we get so much on stage today. It isn't about, oh, didn't I do that wonderful? My job is to make that which is important living and breathing. Physically, on an opera stage perhaps, as much as singing. But it starts with singing. There's nothing I can do on an opera stage that means more than what I am as a singer. Now, I didn't invent that. Go read anything from Joan Sutherland to Marilyn Horne to Luciano Pavarotti to, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da, you know? Being a teacher, you know, very early on, John Barry, one of your colleagues who used to run E&O, and your colleagues being leader of an organization, an opera house, ran E&O, I think he's now in Moscow, wonderful, came to me 20 years ago and said, I've got a summer symposium I'd like to come teach. I said, oh, well, John, that's very nice, but I don't actually teach. He said, I know, that's why I want you to come teach. He said, I want a symposium in the summer of professionals, young professionals that are doing what they do, and come share that with them. Now look, if you're a disaster, I won't bother you again, but you know, it's fine. The kids know what they're up against. They're there, they're working on repertoire. Come listen to them, come work with them. Well, you know, I realized two things there. One, that's an incredibly valid process. Two, it is of course dependent upon the singer. Not all singers, not all artists are naturally big communicators or interested or can actually put their stuff to their side and be there for the other people. And I don't mean that critically, I just mean that's the way it is. You know, I found out that I enjoy that. I found out that I learned as much about what I needed to remember and restudy and go learn again or find out or develop, not as a teacher but as a singer, by communicating that and getting stuck in it. I also realized that I have a gift, and I have a gift of hearing as a singer when other people sing, identifying exactly with what they're doing. And now that is a gift. I didn't train to do that. I'm not sure you can train to do that. But when I am in that place where I'm working with somebody, listening to them sing, I am totally identifying with what they're doing, and therefore working with them. And you have to be very tough sometimes, but I don't think it's about just put down and criticism. Criticism is such a misused word today. A critique must be based on a common sense of knowledge. Otherwise, it makes no sense. Think about the book called The Critique of Reason. Well, that would be an oxymoron, wouldn't it, if it wasn't about a fleshing out of fundamentals. And so I've never thought of education as me coming from some place, handing it, and here's how it goes. Also, I'm deeply dedicated to the fact from the get-go that I am farther down a path that these young people have chosen or been thrust onto or have all the myriad craziness in their 20s that I had. You know, the biggest miracle of my life, I'll tell you, is that through all of the haze and scatteredness and perhaps excitement and ability that I may have shown in my late 20s and early 30s, that there were prescient, gifted, deeply talented, intelligent people that said, we can make something out of that. It dumbfounds me to this day that Lenny Bernstein laid so much confidence at my feet, you know, that I could do what he imagined should be done with a lyric baritone in the world of Mahler and in the songs and so forth. To this day, you know, and I pray every day as I'm working now and more in that environment, that I am as open and generous and understanding and patient, because sometimes, you know, your 20s, you know, sometimes you're somewhere on a motorcycle, somewhere on a tricycle, you know, but it's the spit and vinegar time of life, and so shall it be.
I can imagine it's obvious to see you as teacher, and I'm curious to know. Last question about the foundation, because you now have a foundation,
Right,
bearing your name. What does the foundation do?
Well, it's actually called Hampsong. Get it? Hampsong Foundation. I founded it in 2003. I've always been fascinated with gadgets and that sort of thing. And in 1997, I built my first website in the hope that I wouldn't have to send out all these dreaded press packets. And I thought, well, we'll put up a website and they can just come get it, and I don't have to go through this torture every time. It didn't work out because in 1997, no opera house and no presenter had internet access. So that was it. But I was the first. I got 5 Yahoos for my website because it was really quite something, quite fun. And I've always played with that medium. I've always also wanted a place for me on the web that if somebody went there, and it's called thomashampson.com, what you get and what you read there, from statistics to opinions to whatever, is true. If it's there, I know that it's there, right? There's nothing other about it. There were a lot of little silly things about when I was actually born, or where I actually was raised, or yada yada. You want to just have a place you can do that. In 2003, I made this foundation hoping there were enough like-minded people that would want to protect and support everything that goes into the recital world. The notion of informed performance is as much for those on stage learning their craft as it is for those participating in a sense of what the Germans call Bildung, or that essential understanding or curiosity to find out who you are and why we are, and let that be evidenced through poetry and history and psychology and music. So I thought, well, why don't we make a foundation, and then if people want to help me do my special projects, they're good at tax deduction. And that started out fairly nicely. There weren't nearly as many people passionate financially as they were, wanted to join on, and that's fine. But the Hampsong Foundation, which I think has a mission statement that says something about to proliferate or support the art of song as a cross-cultural platform of dialogue. I need to rework that into a language that sounds more like ours, but and I'm on that, I promise. The point is exactly what we've already talked about, and it's not just about American song. The Song of America. What you have is thomashampson.com, hampsongfoundation.org, and songofamerica.net. And Song of America is its own huge island that is supported by the Hampsong Foundation, and is taking on all of this very heavy lifting in the world of American arts and humanities, American performing arts, and the story of who we are as America through song and classical music. And that's going crazy in our new partnerships with not just the Library of Congress, but the National Urban League and various centers for American music around the country. And that is really exciting. That's what's going to consume my time more and more. We support student projects. We certainly support a great deal of recording projects if they let everything live on the net. At the moment, most of the Hampson projects are deeply Hampson-centric, and for the very simple reason that, of course, I want them to live, and the projects are like children and families to me. But more importantly, I wanted to see that all this stuff worked, and now I'm starting to get some of my colleagues to come in and use our platform and support some of the things we're doing, which is very, very exciting, especially the teachers, and that's a big deal. And of course, it's all open source. It's all free of charge. The archive I have partnered with a journalist at the BBC, John Tulansky, who's interviewed the most major singers for the last 35 years. And so you've got 90-minute interviews with Merana Freni and Luciana Pavarotti and Nikolai Gerhoff and Fischer Dieskau and Elisabeth Schwarzkopf. And it's an amazing resource. When somebody goes to it, they actually enjoy it. I'm not trying to hustle. Please go if you'd like. This is not what tonight is about, but this is what I do, and this is where my focus on education is. I've been teaching for some time, and I also run excuse me to interrupt you, but I run a Lied Academy in Heidelberg. That is a German Liederzentrum. We have a Liedzentrum in Heidelberg, And I have an honorary professorship from the Humanities Fakultät of the University of Heidelberg, which is quite fun.
How do you catch your breath? We're talking about your concert work, your teaching work, your operatic work.
Let's talk about golf.
The Library of Congress. I don't know what your handicap is. I don't even want to know.
10.
How does Thomas Hampson recharge his battery?
All of this charges my battery. I get very frustrated when I get too tired to do what it is I need to do. I get extremely tired when something gets on me. I've not had a good winter. A lot of us have we've been up and down to this cold bronchial thing. Mm-hmm. And the painful thing is, the irritating thing is that your voice, you're not sick, but you've got all this phlegm. There's something that just won't let go, and it's mostly in the bronchial, and it's very, very irritating. Things like that slow me down irritate me. It's a full schedule. I'm obviously passionate about it. I'm trying to talk passionately and quickly about these things. I know we don't have that much time, and I want to share. It's not about giving back. It's about passing on.
Well, I think what is so remarkable is that you are, at the height of your career, still finding time and energy to give back, to pass along, to create continuity from those who
That's
taught.
a wonderful phrase. This is something that, quite frankly, if we don't do in the singing world, as colleagues, I also say this to my younger colleagues very seriously, if we don't take care of the mess we're in, who else is going to? And admittedly, and to give some of my colleagues in the first floor of opera houses a break, it is a hugely unthankful, more complicated job than you can imagine to run an opera house, much less in a democracy. And the skill set that is needed to keep those huge institutions, not just the Met, I'm talking about all of them, to keep them viable, to keep them functioning in all the various pressures of especially contemporary life, which is besotted with distraction devices. Entertainment is essentially the stuff you do when you don't have to work. I've done all that so I can have my free time, and your free time is anything from a basketball game, a Knicks game, to the Met, to the museum, to the hell with it, I'm going to sit on my couch and eat the wrong food and watch television. Whatever all that is, and I think our mandate in the arts is very much as much in the educational world. I think we need to reform our narrative, reestablish and certainly rearticulate the value system, the values we have as human beings, the humanism, if you will, of who we are, that is inherent in liberal arts education. Liberal arts education, the bastion of liberal arts education as a manifestation of self-determination, has been historically, certainly in contemporary history, America. That is under a great deal of pressure today. And I think we need to be very careful about that. I think all of the presenters in opera houses today have as much a mandate of including people into a new world of awareness to the arts and humanities from where all of this stuff comes. There is no opera that is not historically a context of some part of people's lives. It doesn't live over here as some sort of detached fantasy that you have to get into because you like loud sounds in orchestra rooms. That's just nonsense. Bohème is as much a story of the piss and vinegar of any generation. And the tragedy, of course, therein. You could go on, if Don Carlos, if the conversation between those two gigantic, horrifying personalities of Filippo II, who represented a particular frame of mind that is not mine, but at that point was the bastion of humanism compared to the Pope Huberhude, who came in, and they decided the fate of those people trying to fight and die for self-determination, for self-realization, for liberté. This is not an observational process. If you go to Don Carlos and you are deeply, passionately, vibrantly moved by what you hear, see, observe, whether you know why or not, this is participating in the result of that conversation, which has given us what we have today. Why would we not want to share that with generation after generation? I don't understand that, And I think we're committing a kind of cultural suicide sometimes. And I'm a little stone in a large river, and fine, that's what it is. Somebody said, oh, you're like a drop of water on a hot stone. Well, you know, if there were a lot of drops of water, there wouldn't be any hot stones, if that's the metaphor for the problem.
Well, it is just an incredible pleasure to hear you articulate not only the knowledge that you've acquired, but the philosophy that animates it. Ladies and
but
gentlemen,
Mark, this is why you exist here.
Well, it is.
This is a phenomenon, this building. And I'm sorry I haven't been down here. I haven't been in New York that much. But it was wonderful to come to the opening. But the fact that Opera America, and if you go on, if anybody who doesn't realize what it is and goes on the website and starts looking around, and I'm talking from personal experience, you go, I had no idea. Look at all those people. Look at all those functions. Look at all those possibilities. Look at all that support information as well as for the students coming up. This is also what I'm talking about. This is the new world we live in. It's a new kind of education. It's a new kind of way that people are invited to awaken to their own abilities. We have got to get away from this industrialized 19th century form of education. If somebody came back having died 100 years ago and was blindfolded and brought into a classroom with a whiteboard and the electronics and all that kind of stuff, they would know exactly where they were.
It's very true.
And you have to ask yourself, is that the way we're supposed to go forward? All I can say is, and maybe this is a political statement, I'm going to say it as well. Anyway, if this conversation and the few people online or here in the house shaking your head saying, yes, let's not forget that this is a public equation. America is a public institution. We are open for business for the public. We are in the liberal arts business for the public, which means all men, Mensch, people are created equal and have equal opportunity to the endeavors of their own self-determination. That has to remain the American dream. It is e pluribus unum, and the unum is not homogenization. The point is pluribus. It's community. And if we don't reinvigorate public education through institutions like this and everything else, invigoratingly so with classical music. There's nothing elitist in the world about classical music. Classical music is, in my opinion, one of the greatest, if not the greatest evidence of the fact that we have democracy. We wouldn't have had the composers of the early 19th century, middle 19th century, writing what they were trying to write and getting centered, not getting centered, had it not been for this wave of new thought after the American and French Revolution that said, no, damn it, it is my right to play that music in that hall or with those people and believe in those things. This is what we need to cherish again, in my opinion. And classical music is, in my opinion, at the front of it, not at the back of it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard our anthem.
Exactly. And I congratulate you.
We are so grateful to Thomas Hampson, artist Thomas Hampson, humanist and teacher and colleague and ally. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Thomas Hampson. Thank you so much.